Okay, so let's begin with connectivity. Remember, we have four of the things we're looking at right now: sensors and devices, connectivity, data processing, and then the user interface. So now we're on the connectivity phase. So immediately, let's talk about how connectivity has been a major factor. And then we're going to look at connectivity options. Okay, so when it comes to connecting the Internet of Things, there are a lot of options that you can get for connectivity. But most of those options are standard things we use or we know already on daily basis. So let's get right into it. Okay, we have cellular. I remember mentioning this before. That's the SIM card and the cellular network that we use, mobile network that we use currently. That's what your cellular is. And then we have satellite, we have Wi-Fi, we have Bluetooth, you have RFID, and then NFC, LPWAN, and Ethernet. As simple as some of these terms are, especially the short forms, the ones that are abbreviated, we really don't pay attention to their full meaning. For example, Wi-Fi. Can someone tell me the full meaning of Wi-Fi without actually googling it, without typing it on Google? What is the full meaning of Wi-Fi? You know that you have to think about it first. Okay, Victor Taiwo said wireless fidelity. I'm sure some of us will have to think about it first before we even come to that term, wireless fidelity. Other persons would have to Google it to get to that answer of wireless fidelity, because it's not important. The short form has taken over the big one, Wi-Fi. Same thing with SMS. Some of these things are so common, but we sometimes forget that they are abbreviations. Okay, so but at least we understand what it is. So we're going to be looking at some of those connection options or connectivity options. Now, what you have to consider for their differences or for the choice of choosing each of them for your IoT ecosystem is the trade-off between power consumption, range, and bandwidth. These are the three things you have to consider a lot before you can decide which connection options to use to connect your devices or sensors to the cloud or to the gateway. Now, the perfect connection option would consume little power, it would have a very long range, and would be able to transmit large amount of data. So the best should at least have high bandwidth, should go to cover a very long range, but have very low consumption. But do you think that is possible in this day and time? And this is what leads to us dividing those connectivity options into three groups. And the three groups that we're dividing them into is high power consumption, high range, and high bandwidth. That's number one. So the ones that have high power consumption but they have high range and high bandwidth. Second one is the low power consumption, low range, and high bandwidth. And the third one is low power consumption, high range, and low bandwidth. Now, there is no better choice in these three options, in these three major groups. You can't say, okay, I'll have to go for number three. Instead of, there are different instances when they all come into play. These groups more or less serve as a framework for thinking about connectivity. It is not like there's a distinct method of classification like this. It's just a way to think about these things. So there are some connectivity standards that fall into the different range that sit on the fence between maybe number 2 and number 3, or number 1 and number 2. Okay, so that's what we would have to bear in mind. Now, moving forward, I'm looking at the first one now, the high power consumption, high range, and high bandwidth. Okay, to wirelessly send a lot of data, when you have devices that send a lot of data over great distance, it takes a lot of power. For example, your smartphone. Your phone can receive and transmit large amount of data. You can upload videos, download videos, and so on and so forth over great distances on the internet. But you remember that that phone needs to charge. As far as that data is turned on and you're using internet every time, that phone needs to be charged at least once every 24 hours. If your phone is very good, once every 48 hours. Okay, now that's you begin to understand the high power consumption, high range, and high bandwidth. Okay, then moving forward, what's on my screen is talking about the connectivity options in this group includes cellular and satellite. So cellular is used when the sensor and device is within the coverage of cell towers. There's connectivity around those places. So for places where there is no cellular connection, then satellite becomes necessary. That's how that works. So you can think of the high power consumption, high range, and high bandwidth example as the phone. Then the low power consumption, low range, and high bandwidth. This is where Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and internet comes in. It has a lower power consumption, it has lower range, but it has high bandwidth. So this is where that comes on. Then to decrease power consumption and still send a lot of data, you have to reduce the range. That's what it means. So connectivity options in this group will include Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and Internet, as I've mentioned. You know what Ethernet is. Ethernet is the wiring, hard wiring, cable. Now the range is short because it can only go as far as the wire length. And Bluetooth are both wireless connections. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth have very low range. It doesn't go very far. That's the low power consumption, low range, and high bandwidth. Okay, Tonya is saying that he sincerely did not know the full meaning of the Wi-Fi. Like I said, I don't think there's an exam where they'll ask you what's the full meaning of Wi-Fi. If you know what Wi-Fi is and know how to use it and know how to set it up, it pretty much covers it. But at least thank God you have been able to understand now wireless fidelity. Although I know a couple of months time you forget about it again as well, unless you use it constantly. Now the third option here is the low power consumption, high range, but low bandwidth. Remember, the previous one was low power, low range, high bandwidth. This one is low power, high range, low bandwidth. So connectivity options in this group are called LPWAN. Okay, so to increase the range while maintaining low power consumption, you have to reduce the amount of data you are sending. LPWAN, they are responsible for sending small amounts of data, which allows them to operate at very low power with ranges in miles rather than the higher ones like the feet and co. And so, for example, a moisture sensor that you put on the ground for an agricultural IoT ecosystem, instead of sending a lot of data, all it might need to send is just temperature or just the moisture, just a number, just a single number. It's enough. Maybe it might send that number once every hour or once every 2 hours. So those things will help it conserve power, and because it's sending it at a distance, it now requires you the bandwidth should be small so that it can accommodate for those changes. So those are the three major groups: the high power consumption, high range, and high bandwidth. Everything is high there. And the next one, the only thing that is high is the bandwidth. That's the low power consumption, low range. This is where Wi-Fi and Bluetooth falls in. While the last one there is a low power consumption but high range and low bandwidth. So sending little data across a high range of network. Okay, so now breaking down our connectivity options into where they belong. The first one here, you have cellular. Cellular connectivity is usually reserved for backhaul, that is a gateway that might be using LPWAN to talk to all other sensors. In clean or in practical examples, the compromise is between power consumption and range. So the cellular is focused on range and bandwidth, but not on power consumption. Okay, so it can send a lot of data across long distances, but it can drain battery for you quicker. So when such a device is needed, or when such an option is needed, then you know where to go for. Okay, so when it comes to IoT applications that require remote sensors that needs to last months, of course, you know cellular connection should not be what you're thinking about, because it will simply just eat up the battery at a very short time. So that's why they are usually reserved for what's called the backhaul. That means a gateway for LPWAN. Let me see if I can break it down and give you a typical example. A typical example would be like we have an agricultural field, a big farm, and then you have networks of LPWAN, like long range but low power, and they are all connected to one gateway. Now that gateway can have a cellular connection to the tower or a cellular connection to the internet. So the small ones, the small sensors send via LPWAN to the gateway, and the gateway has cellular connection, of course. And that tower where the gateway is, there might be light, there might be electricity, power to always keep it connected. So that's like your typical example of when to implement that. And of course, we understand that cellular network is breaking the sound of your voice. That's me saying that. Is anybody experiencing this? Is anybody else experiencing this, or just by me? Can anybody else hear me clearly? Mr. Henry Chesson, you indicated you have a question to ask. Okay, others are hearing me clearly. That means it's your own internet connection. If it's possible to change location in your place to see if you can get a better reception. Okay, Mr. Jude is suggesting that you refresh your browser and join again. The person that asked, I wanted to ask a question. Is he still here with us? Okay, I don't think he's here anymore. Okay, let's forge ahead. We just mentioned, or we just talked about cellular, and then we know, of course, cellular has their different types. We know 2G, 3G. I remember when 2G was a thing. When then we were thinking about what was the proper term for that 2G network. There was a particular term we normally use very well back then, before 3G became a thing. A GPRS, if my memory serves me right. It's GPRS. Mr. Ahmed, of course. I can't forget you. You're always in my assessments. I have a list of them, so don't worry about it. Forget it. Forgive me for not mentioning your name on Tuesday. I know you're a regular as well, so forgive my the mishap. Good that you can hear me nice and clear. Okay, so remember when GPRS was a thing? Your internet was faster when it was on GPRS. Now we can't even stand GPRS. Like if my phone moves from 4G to 2G, I can't stand it. I'm probably looking to go and buy another SIM. That period. So you have 2G, you have 3G, you have 4G. Now we're hearing 5G is coming up Very soon we all have to change phones because the 5G network uses a different kind of device. And so that's that. And then some new cellular technologies like Cat1, LTE-M, and MB-IoT. These last three I just mentioned, are specifically aimed at IoT applications. They are new, they are still in the development stages. They are supposed to enable a better use of the IoT platform. Because try and imagine us trying to connect everything to the internet, right? And then eventually you connect your, let me see, some life sensitive device to the internet, maybe your gas sensor in the house to the internet, but the internet connection between the gas sensor and the cloud platform is very slow. So before the sensor can even send message to the cloud, gas would have killed everybody in the house. So that's why you see that sometimes there's a slow adoption of some of these technologies in Africa. But I hope we'll get there soon enough. Okay, so we're looking at satellites. Tonye said 5G is evil. That if we shouldn't bring it here. Please don't mix technology and religion. Okay, technology is a different thing entirely, while religion is a different thing. I remember very well when television was a sin. The internet was not even something that the religious circle would accept. Okay, I remember very well that time that getting a TV felt like you were committing a sin against God. So, but now we have all come to understand this. Okay, Tony said he's joking. Yeah, I believe that nobody here has that kind of inclination, thinking that once you hear 5G, that it's the end of the world and everything. Yes, technology has to be controlled. If it is controlled, it should do great things. It should help us do great things. You want to use it to serve God, it should help you do that. Okay, so moving forward, we'll move from cellular to satellite. So satellite is a form of connectivity that uses the word satellite, that uses the technology satellite. Okay, you understand what a satellite is, using the DSTV dish as an example, DSTV satellite as an example. It helps you connect without some physical hassle, without having to deploy multiple cell towers everywhere. So as the name implies, this form of connectivity uses satellite to connect sensors and devices to the cloud. Okay, the importance of satellite connectivity to IoT comes from its incredible coverage. It covers a lot. A single network of satellites can provide coverage to the entire planet. So you don't have to worry about the remote places that there's no network for you to implement your IoT ecosystem. Okay, so a single device moving around the world can stay on a single network and use a single connectivity type. Okay, now remember how tracking has become a thing: car tracking, device tracking. Now imagine if the person decides to let's say, use any of our telecom networks. Let's say use our Nigerian Globe, and then that's what you are using. That's what you implemented on the car to track the car, and the car runs into one village that does not have Glow network. Everything has gone dark as at that time. There will be no communication as at that time. So whatever that car does in that location where there's no network, you can't find it. So this is where satellite becomes important. Okay, it has an incredible range, giving it an advantage in remote area that other communication types such as cellular or Wi-Fi cannot reach. Like in underdeveloped places, that's where satellite becomes a thing. But satellites can be divided into two major configurations with their respect to connectivity. So you have the direct and you have the backhaul. Okay, the direct has two different subcategories. Direct can either be dual mode or the satellite only mode. The dual mode in this case is you being able to connect to cellular when it's available, and when cellular is not available, you switch over to satellite, so that it will reduce the cost of using satellite every time, because it's quite some cost. It's a very high cost. That's a very high cost. So this gives you best of both worlds. If we leverage on the lower cost and higher bandwidth of cellular when possible, when it's around, but then make use of satellite connectivity, which covers a greater range when cellular data is no more available. That's for the dual mode. Of course, the name satellite only can tell you what the other one is, so I shouldn't be explaining satellite only. All of what we're talking about now is the direct satellite configuration. Now, the best example for dual mode is like shipping containers, those companies that deal in shipping. So whenever they are in their docks in specific countries, you can have cellular connection, but immediately they go into the sea, they now revert to using the satellite connection. Okay, satellite only, I said it before, is exactly like it sounds. You only connect to satellite, just that it has a higher implication for cost. So for example, like the oil and gas industry, their offshore sites where there's no cell tower, they simply just use satellites altogether. Okay, the second major type of satellite configuration is backhaul. Your backhaul simply means the main tower connects directly to the satellite, but on the other side, that means on the sensor side, sensors are connected to a low power one. Then the low power one can now connect to the main tower that sends to the satellite. So it's not like you're utilizing satellite every time, but when it is needed. So satellite will now be the one responsible for taking those data captured by the sensors up to the cloud. That's what we're looking at here, the direct and the backhaul satellite configuration. Moving forward, satellite requires high power usage and can require large pieces of equipment. I just mentioned this before. The cost of it is high. So this raises the cost for individual sensors and can make direct connection infeasible for groups of sensors. Okay? It means that when I'm asking you questions like which of the following can fall into your high power consumption, high bandwidth, and high what's the last option? High range. Of course, you know satellite is one of those connectivity options. In fact, it's the main connectivity option when you talk about high power consumption, high range, and high bandwidth. Just as cellular also falls into that capacity. So moving on from satellites, we're moving on straight to Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi has a few notable differences from other technologies. For example, Wi-Fi transmits on 2.4 or 5 gigahertz. These frequencies are higher than the normal cellular transmission. It's different from what you get from your cellular. Okay? Now, the higher frequency means that the signals can carry more data. That's what it means. That's why you notice that that same MTN SIM that you use on your phone, when you remove from your phone and put it in a router, it is faster. When you are connected to the MTN router or the Glo router, it is faster than when you are using it on your phone. That tells you because the frequency it's operating at is a bit higher, so it carries more data. Okay? But remember that as far as you are using wireless, the Wi-Fi, there's a trade-off between power consumption, range, and bandwidth. So in exchange for high data rates, the Wi-Fi will consume power as well. Okay? And you know that the Wi-Fi range is not as much as the other ones I've mentioned, like satellite and co. So the longest range a Wi-Fi can give you that has ever given to anybody is 260 miles. That's the highest range. And even with that particular range, there was a lot of hardware involved. The company that did that, or the country that did that, was Sweden. The Swedish Space Agency. They were able to transmit data across 260 miles, but they didn't use standard Wi-Fi equipment. With standard Wi-Fi equipment, you should be getting something around the range of remember the data we do, or the connections we do in offices, 100 feet. That's the common one that you can get. Okay, so sensors might need to go further than that, but this is what Wi-Fi will offer you. Now, factors that determine range for Wi-Fi could include the antenna of the device, the reflection and refraction in that area, and the radio power output. All of this would help control, or would be factors that determine the range of the Wi-Fi device. Like the average range would be 100 feet for the Wi-Fi. Still a continuation on the Wi-Fi. It can be good for IoT that don't have to worry about power drain. So devices that are plugged into power can use this. So they need to send a lot of data, like video, and that don't need high range. A good example would be home security. Your CCTV does not travel so far from the roof to the basement of the house, or from a skyscrapers down to the connection room, or to the security room. That's the distance it travels, and it's fair enough, because electricity is constantly powered. The moment you start thinking about using battery, the more you start looking at reducing the range, or reducing the data that is being transferred. And of course, we know that Wi-Fi has the different types, and those are the types I'm displaying right now. Wi-Fi has different types. Ahmed said my mic is fluctuating. Can you hear me better now? Hello, Mr. Ahmed. Can you hear me better now? Is anybody else experiencing the fluctuating mic? I need to know if the network problem is coming from my own side. Okay, Samuel is saying no. So Ahmed, it's from your own end. Please check your internet connection. I apologize for this. If you have your questions, you can please drop your questions or save it for our physical class so that we can tackle it. I'm sure we will not have network issues when we're having the physical class. Okay. So types of Wi-Fi, I have the 802.11a, B, G, N, AC. Those are the regular ones that you know, or regular ones that we know. Okay. Now each of these standards come with their various pros and cons. There are various advantages and disadvantages. Okay, so because the hardware is different, sometimes you have to buy the hardware to upgrade from one network type, from one Wi-Fi type to another. So that becomes a cost factor. While Wi-Fi currently isn't great for many IoT applications, there are two of them that are beginning to make sense. The two of them are currently under development. Okay, that's the last two. The Wi-Fi Halo, that's the 802.11ah, and the Wi-Fi Hue, the 802.11ax. Okay, so when those two finally hit the market, they should be able to handle a lot of our IoT devices. That's the last two there, the Wi-Fi Halo and the Wi-Fi Hue. Now, the Wi-Fi Halo was rectified in 2016. What it was aimed at doing was addressing the range and power concerns of IoT applications. The HEW for the other one stands for high efficiency wireless. It's an upcoming standard. Okay, it wants to make IoT a little bit more friendly in terms of connecting. The next one we're looking at now is Bluetooth, and this is probably one of the most common or the most popular of our connections. The Bluetooth was invented by Ericsson in 1994. It was just intended to enable wireless headsets to connect to music, but then it has been expanded into different applications. Yes, it's still majorly being used amongst those Bluetooth speakers and the rest of them, but it has advanced into where you have printers, you have some video game controllers that use it as well, and then IoT is beginning to key into Bluetooth. So what we're looking at here is low range, high bandwidth, low power. Okay, that's where Bluetooth falls into. It's important for rapid growing IoT, including smart homes and industrial applications. So you can have Bluetooth devices that are very tiny, that uses as small as the watch battery. In fact, tinier than that. Okay, that's where Bluetooth comes in. Now, when Bluetooth devices connect to each other, for example, when you connect your phone with your wireless speaker, it uses something called the parent-child model. The phone becomes the parent, and the child is the wireless speaker. Meaning the phone is the one that keeps sending the information, transmitting it, while the child just listens for that information. That's where, or that's how that is. Okay, so a Bluetooth parent can have up to 7 children. Some devices are limited, but a computer can connect to as many Bluetooth devices as 7. Okay, now when devices are connected via Bluetooth, it is called a piconet. I know some of you will be hearing this word for the first time, but please take note. It's called a piconet. That's when you create a Bluetooth network. You use Bluetooth to create a network. Okay, now not only can a device be a parent in one piconet and a child in a different piconet, because that's possible. You can be in one Bluetooth network and be a child. You're just a listener. And in another Bluetooth network, you're a parent. Okay, but also a parent can switch and become a child at any point in time. So when you put your Bluetooth device in a pairing mode to connect, it temporarily becomes the parent so that it can establish connection. And when it has established that connection, sometimes it switches to become a child. Remember, when 2 phones are paired, anybody can send and anybody can receive. Okay, that's the switching. Now, in contrast to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth was meant for just portable equipment. So it does not do, it does some small range of connection. But there's one thing about it that is important, is that it has very little configuration time. Like, there's a very little thing you have to do for configuration. All you have to do is connect 2 devices. Unlike the Wi-Fi that needs a lot of setup. Okay, so, and because Bluetooth uses something called weak signals, there is limited interference. You don't easily see interference. We can be in a company that has a lot of electrical interference and Bluetooth is still connecting and working. So it can easily work in a noisy environment. When I say noisy, I don't mean human noise. I mean electronic noise, when there's electronic interference. But the problem with Bluetooth is this: it has low bandwidth. Have you ever tried to send a movie via Bluetooth? You understand what I mean by low bandwidth. The low bandwidth in this case is that it cannot go very far. It cannot transfer high data. Everybody's complaining about network. Network seems to be bad today. Okay, now I have another person complaining. Mr. Francis is complaining. Obayemi is complaining. Is anybody actually having an okay network? Is anybody hearing me okay? Okay, Heyman is hearing me okay. Muhyiddin is hearing me okay. Jude is hearing me okay. Okay, so it means that the problem is not from my own side. The network problem is not from my own side. Okay, network has been fluctuating. Okay, I can understand that. Well, apologize for that. I'll still inform you that okay, I'm recording this, so I'll be able to upload it and then send you a link to get the bits and pieces that you missed based on network. We sincerely apologize for that. Okay, we're still talking about network, Bluetooth. Now, the drawback to Bluetooth is the low bandwidth. But most of the applications that use it, most of the IoT applications that use it, don't send much data across. We don't intend to start using Bluetooth for CCTV, for video feed. No, it's just devices that send little data that we'll use the Bluetooth for. Okay, for like the smart home, connecting a couple of devices around the home together. That's when we use the Bluetooth connection. The next one here is the LPWAN, the low power wide area network. Okay, it's a wireless wide area network technology that interconnects low bandwidth battery powered devices with low bit rates over long range. The only thing that is high in this particular connectivity model is range. And when I mean high, I don't mean very high. Every other thing is low. It's low bandwidth, it's low power consumption. Just the only thing high there is your range, the long range. Okay, as the name implies, low power consumption. That's the low power LP over wide area, which is equivalent to what we say long range. Okay, now how is this accomplished? It's accomplished by breaking the network down. So messages sent over LPWAN must be small and simple. So their simplicity makes it easy to transmit them over long distances without large power source. So you'll be thinking about machine-to-machine connections and IoT networks. The LP would operate at a lower cost with a greater power efficiency. Remember, what helps them go further is when you now introduce a gateway. And you now bring in a gateway. Now that gateway can have high power, long range, long bandwidth. So if I have 10,000 sensors in my farm, I can use LPWAN to connect the 10,000 to a gateway that's capable of transmitting high bandwidth. So each sensor is bringing in low bandwidth and they all get to the gateway. The gateway can now forward the high bandwidth to the cloud for processing, for data analysis and processing. So, okay, that's what your low power WAN talks about. And then moving forward with it's here I came up with. It started around 2013, not as a new technology standard, but a class of wireless technology that is well suited to specific needs of machine-to-machine and IoT devices. That is the reason why that technology was carved out. Okay. Now moving forward, messages sent over the LPWAN must be small and simple. I mentioned that before. Okay, most LPWAN connect using the star topology. That means they connect multiple devices each connected to their self. That's the star topology. Okay, it can accommodate packet sizes of 10 to 1000 bytes at uplink speed of 200 kilobytes per second or kilobits per second. The long range you talk about varies from 2 kilometers to 1000 kilometers, depending on the technology that is being used. Okay, so I think there's a picture here. Okay, there's a picture here that shows you how they are all interwoven, all connected together, and you are seeing some of those technologies that utilize the LPWAN, Sigfox, LoRa, and NB-IoT. The downsides to using LPWAN is this: messages that are transmitted sometimes aren't received by the gateway. This is what we refer to as packet loss. But the solution to that problem is sending multiple messages to the gateway, or by adding additional gateways to the network. Remember, I gave you an example of a moisture device planted on the ground that's maybe in an hour sends just a few bytes of data. So if there are packet losses, the transmission, you can increase the frequency to like every 20 minutes or every 30 minutes to make sure at least one gets there, or you can now introduce more gateways to ensure that the distance in between the sender and the receiver is reduced. Those are the downsides to it. Now, jumping away from LPWAN, or moving to radio frequency identification, RFID. I'm just going to skim through these two. They are not as important as the others because these ones are already existing, like they are already implemented. Now, radio frequency identification, RFID, uses electromagnetic fields. All it needs to do is have a reader and the tag itself. The two is what combines to form this network of radio frequency identification. Okay, an RFID consists of a tiny radio transponder, a radio receiver, and a transmitter. Now, when triggered by an electromagnetic interrogation pulse from the reader itself, the tag will transmit data. That data is usually something simple like a number, and that's what you see most of these chain stores, supermarkets. That's what they use. The items are already tagged. All you need to do is read it with a reader, and the reader activates the information concerning that particular tag that has already initially been entered into the system. Okay, and this is what your RFID is all about: being able to identify objects and being able to analyze data using the objects identified. Remember that the word IoT became a thing from the RFIDs. It was in the concept of creating, identifying objects and tagging every object and connecting them to some form of system that gave birth to the Internet of Things. Aside this picture, I have another picture here that talks about how the RFID reader works, how the antenna and the RFID tags work. So when you get a copy of my slides, you should be able to read through it and understand. And the last option here is the NFC, the near field communication. Who has heard of NFC? Have you ever heard of NFC before? If you have heard of NFC before, can you tell me where you encountered it? How did you encounter NFC? Okay, that's a typical example. Mr. Jude said it's on the phone. NFC technology on the phone. Some countries has gone far with the use of NFC, where you can use your phone and pay for things without having to type anything, type a credit card number or anything. Just bring your phone closer to the payment system, and it reads it, and that's all. That's what your typical NFC is all about. It's a short range, high frequency wireless communication technology that enables exchange of data between devices over a distance of about 4 to 5 centimeters. That's how NFC works. Remember, this falls into the short range, that's low bandwidth, then high frequency. Okay, that's what we're looking at for NFC. It's an upgrade from RFID. So it combines the interface of a smart card and a reader into a single device. It allows us to share content between digital devices, pay bills, or wirelessly. Okay, now one of the advantages of using NFC is that even if the phone is dead, even if the phone is off, the battery that powers that part of the phone is still available. This one of my slides is mentioning the significant advantage of NFC over Bluetooth, because it is short. It's easier to set up NFC. There's no need for the connect and you pairing and co. All it does is just read it. So instead of performing manual configurations to identify the Bluetooth device, the connection between the two NFC devices is established at once, like 1/10 of a second, and it's done. That's what your NFC is all about. Okay, so due to the shorter range, it provides higher degree of security than Bluetooth. So it makes NFC suitable for crowded areas. It can also work when one device is not powered by a battery, e.g. the phone can be off, and you can use a smart card as well to do it. So there is little or no need for too much power for NFCs. Okay, we're going to be ending with a lot of this information. Is it possible to skip connectivity altogether? In the IoT ecosystem, is it possible to avoid the connectivity to the cloud? Right? So there are certain cases where data processing or interaction with sensors through the user interface can take place without any data first being transferred over an external network. There are cases where that is possible, where there is no need to transfer data outside. That particular kind of scenario is what we refer to as the fog computing. FOG, the fog computing, or the edge computing. Now, why do we even consider skipping such external connectivity? The two options is what you see on your screen: the latency and data size. I remember mentioning latency before, how long it takes for data to move from starting point to the end point. So if my fire alarm is to connect via an external network to get to the cloud, and then from the cloud come back down to inform my water sprinkler to start working. Imagine if the network was bad on that day, like we're experiencing today. That means fire would have caught the entire house before sprinkler would turn on. That's latency. That's sometimes why you need to skip connectivity, that external type of connectivity. Now, data size as well, the amount of data that needs to be sent across sometimes will be a limiting factor. Okay, so those are the two reasons. So another reason is sending lots of data can become really expensive. Okay, imagine video cameras recording and sending everything and streaming the video, and the video is just an empty space that is recording. So these are the reasons sometimes why the external connectivity is skipped. Okay, so rather than send data over a network for it to be processed in the cloud, an alternative approach is to process the data on a gateway. So that gateway device will now be the one to process the data, or if possible, process it on the sensor or device itself. So that's why you notice that the sensor for fire and that for the sprinkler to start working will be in the same place. Once the smoke detector kicks in, the connection between the smoke detector and the sprinkler is close by. There's no long network. Immediately the sprinkler starts working. Okay, that's where this is where we term it as fog computing or edge computing. I hope everybody understands this, because I'm going to be asking questions on this on our Saturday review. Saturday might be our final review before we can start planning for our practical classes. Okay, I don't know if we have enough time. This is 5:30 already. We might not have time to start dealing with the cloud platform, so we might save that for our next class. Let's see if we can entertain some questions about this class. Questions for those of us who have been having network issues. What was I talking about when the network started breaking, so that I can see if I can reiterate? Samuel said the data services are really bad from my side. Let me show you what I'm working with. You should be able to understand my internet connection. If I open a YouTube video and you see how fast the YouTube video plays, that's how you know my current internet speed.